realizing, holy shit, like I am actually not alone. And there's so much power that you can gain for yourself, that your situation is not unique. And this isn't a terrible thing that's just happening to you.
Welcome to Voices of Deconversion. In each episode, an atheist or agnostic shares their story of deconversion from Christianity. Our stories remind us we're in it together. They encourage us as we discover who we are and help us to embrace who we become. Now here's Steve with today's guest.
Welcome back, everyone. Today I talked to April. April grew up under a lot of pressure from her parents and expectations from family and the church. Purity culture had a strong influence on her. She grew up in the Bible Belt and was homeschooled. I want to give a warning that we discuss an abusive relationship, mental health issues, and suicide in this episode. So if those are issues that are difficult for you to listen to, I just wanted to let you know beforehand. When the abusive relationship ends in April's life, she begins to question things, and specifically, something I really liked that she had to say was she begins to question how this is handled within Christianity. She poses the questions, what happens when your autonomy is taken from you? And she also said, this happens to a lot of people. What do we do then? And I thought those were really insightful questions and really powerful questions that she was asking herself at that point in her life. Eventually, April takes an astronomy class in college, and during that class, she has an epiphany. She has a moment that is really significant and kind of changes the course of her life. April shares about her mental health issues and how suicidal thoughts have been intrusive for her since childhood. April feels like she's in a much better place mentally now, and she's created distance. I think because she's created distance between herself and people or places that were not healthy for her. It's a wonderful conversation, and I think you're really going to enjoy it. All right, I am here with April today. April, thanks for joining me on the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah.
So exciting.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, let's, I always like to start with just asking how people kind of think of themselves now that they have deconverted from Christianity. So do you consider yourself an atheist, agnostic, or is there another way that you would describe kind of where you're at now that you're not a Christian?
I would describe myself as technically agnostic, but functionally atheist. A lot of people on your podcast have said this, and I think it's impossible to know that there is absolutely no God. We can't know everything, but given the information that we have currently, it's not possible.
Yeah. So tell me about kind of your Christian origins. Like, what kind of family did you grow up in? How did Christianity influence you when you were growing up? That kind of thing.
There was not really an aspect of my childhood that was untouched by Christianity, and my whole family's religion. I have 3 siblings, so one of 4. Not a massive family, but growing up in the Bible Belt, the church I grew up in started in our living room. It was integral. And beyond that, I never attended public school or really any school. I was homeschooled from start to finish, as were my other siblings. As you can imagine, the large reason for that was to shield us from science. There are some other factors. My mom did see pretty early stages that we might have issues, like learning issues, like ADD, ADHD, whatever. And she didn't want us to get. I'm trying to give her a little bit of credit because I do know this had something to do with it. She didn't want us to get pushed to the side in a classroom setting, and wanted to be able to teach us depending on what we need to be taught, which I am very grateful for. But a very real reason for that is definitely to shield us from science.
Yeah, so there were kind of like some different reasons. Like maybe there were some like developmental things going on, like ADD or like other things that she wanted to like be there to help you guys through like learning,
Right.
but also like the conservative Christian evangelical parent thing of like need to protect them and keep them safe from the
Yeah,
world and make them good
exactly.
little Christians so that they're, yeah.
And I mean, because of that, I didn't have a social life outside of church either. So I didn't have school friends. I had some neighborhood friends, but they were Christians as well. Many of them attended our church. So even, just the neighborhood kids, they had to be Christians, and I
Yeah.
that's that was my whole circle for pretty much my entire childhood was
Wow.
religion.
So you said that the church started in your house. So was it like, did your parents start it or?
It's kind of complicated, and I was very young at the time, so I may be misremembering some things. But essentially, there was a they belonged to a church, and the pastor left abruptly. I'm not really sure what that was about. But they lost the building, and so they just started meeting at my parents' house for a while. And they did that for a while and found a new pastor that was starting a church in the same area by the same name and didn't want to just show up and like take over. So they kind of did like a merger thing. And now it's massive, like tons of campuses
That's the one that you had
over
mentioned
this right over the
before.
span of like 20 years.
That's insane.
Is huge.
So, are you saying that your parents, like they lost the building and then they kind of started meeting at your parents' house, that split off into the big church?
It
Like,
just it absorbed. So
yeah.
it did that the church that as it is now was not how it was during the merging. It was still very small. The pastor that wanted to merge with my parents' church was coming from out of state and was just trying to start his own little congregation or whatever.
Yeah.
And now it's just
That was huge.
exploded. Yeah.
Wow.
And it's a non-denominational church, which I've always found very hard to explain to
I
people because
know.
I grew up non-denominational, and it's very like sort of as you see fit. There's not like an overarching like doctrination beyond
Yeah. It,
what's in the Bible.
I don't know. You can tell me your experience, but like the non-denominational churches I went to were really charismatic and like speaking in tongues and all
Yeah.
the gifts of the
So
Spirit. Is that?
there are definitely people who did that, and then there are definitely people who didn't care for it. And I mean, it was kind of a little bit of everything. So one morning, Sunday morning, I could sit next to somebody who's speaking in tongues, and that's not something I ever did or felt the need to do, but it didn't off-put me because it was
Yeah.
for them. And so that's kind of how the congregation worked is like as you see fit, as
Yeah.
long as you're not doing anything strictly anti-biblical.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're cool.
Interesting. Yeah. Yeah. Non-denominational to me is just like a way for people to be like, we're not like mainstream Christians. We're cool. Like that's kind of how
Yeah,
I always thought of it.
yeah.
Like
I
we
mean,
get
that's
it.
pretty
Yeah.
accurate. That's
Yeah.
pretty accurate.
Yeah. But yeah, and to an extent, I feel like a lot of Christians kind of tend to have that well, my denomination is we really kind of do it right, or we don't do that silly stuff those other people do. Like I have a friend that I used to go to school with, and he is Episcopalian, and like would look. I feel like kind of looks down on Christians who are evangelical. He's actually conservative, which is interesting, but he looks down. And we went to like a liberal Bible school, so but I just and it's not uncommon for Christians to kind of think
Mhm.
like I mean everyone's in the denomination they think is the right
Is
one,
correct. Yeah.
right? But you get a lot of that. Christians people in general are judgmental, so
hmm
that happens.
They
But
think that their brand is the correct one.
yeah, that's right. Yeah. So tell me how your Christianity was personally. Like, did you feel like you had a relationship with God, or did you just kind of feel like you were going through the motions, or what was your experience growing up as far as how did your Christianity play out day to day in your life, besides just like being raised in a like homeschooled
Right.
and yeah.
My personal experience was a little bit strange, because it was very different from the rest of my family, I feel like. I was very religious. I don't get me wrong. It was not like I just don't feel this as much as they do.
Mm-hmm.
I just had it was a very personal thing for me. I didn't feel the need to prove it to anybody, or I was personally not evangelical, like, at all.
Mm.
Felt that that was very strange. And I was told when I was really young that people will convert when they see how good your life is and how happy you are. You don't have to
Yeah.
shove it down their throats. They'll be an example of them, essentially. And I really took that to heart. And I didn't like being pushed to do anything. So it was sort of my personal mantra that I'm just going to live my life and try to be the best I can be, and people will want to be that as well. And that is not exactly how the rest of my family thought. I got baptized when I was 13, but I didn't
Mm-hmm.
get baptized because I wanted to. I didn't care about getting baptized
Wow.
because I didn't think it was anybody's business.
Mm,
It
right.
was my salvation was my salvation, and it's going to be different for you, and this is irrelevant.
That's really
And
interesting.
the only reason I got baptized was to appease my parents, because they were just like, "Oh, your brother got baptized when he was 6. Oh, your sisters got baptized." And it's just like, I don't care. But if going into this pool makes you happy and it makes you stop with this, I'll do it.
Oh my God, that's so funny.
So that's why, like, as you can see, it was very personal for me.
Yeah, you kept it to yourself because not like kept it to yourself in like a this is my own business. Like,
Right,
it's nobody else's business how I feel about God, religion, Christianity, you know,
right.
that's
And
that's kind of
it
my own
didn't,
thing.
I didn't feel like I had to prove my righteousness to anybody.
Yeah.
And it always weirded me out, that sort of behavior. Altar calls were very strange for me. I never did them. I'd never gone to an altar call because I was like, I can literally do that right here where I'm sitting, because God's
Yeah.
everywhere, like, it's with the whole show. So growing up feeling that way in a house that does not feel that way was pretty strange and a little alienating. And because of that, I was always seen as, like, probably the least Christian child.
Interesting.
Um, I've, I mean, I've been the black sheep of the family literally since I was born.
It's because you don't play along with the like the pomp and circumstance of
Yeah,
Christianity.
the theatrics, the drama
Yeah.
of it
Yeah.
all.
And I do think there's some people that the tradition's very important to them and, being baptized or going through a ceremony really is important to them. And I don't think that like that's bad inherently, but like I like the kind of Christianity that you had. I feel like that's the best version of it. Like
Mhm.
it should be a personal thing. And I don't care if my mom and my dad and my friends or whoever want to be Christian and believe in all sorts of, spiritual things and like, whatever they believe in, like if as long as like it makes them happy and helps them get through life, like don't and it doesn't hurt other people, I really don't care. And
Mhm.
I think Christianity becomes toxic when they start like pushing it on other people or trying to change policy in the public sphere, and
Right.
that's when it becomes really annoying. So I really like this idea of like it's my personal, and it makes me think back to like the way I felt about people who were like that, like in youth groups when I was younger. I always kind of thought like they're closing themselves off to God if they're quiet and sitting in the chair.
Hmm.
Like, but that's just not true. It's just their
Yeah.
it's their personality. It's their own business, how they, adapt Christianity to their life.
Hmm.
So,
Yeah. So as you can imagine, it was really strange. I always felt very private, but as a result of that, I felt very closed off to a lot of experiences, like, socially,
okay.
because of the way that my family treated me, and thus how I was perceived by everybody else. Because, like I said, my family was very prevalent
Hmm.
in my only social circle. It's just
So give me some examples of how your family was showing their Christianity. Like you were very private, you kept it to yourself. How did they kind of?
missionary work,
Okay.
which I was never interested in, and I was criticized for that. I did a few inner city missions. I never traveled abroad. And most of the inner city missions I did was just showing up to like clean up after a natural disaster, not specifically to go preach to people. I never did that. It always made me feel so strange. But yeah, missionary work, just being like vocal about my beliefs to other people, essentially just evangelical activities. I was, like I said, I wasn't making a show of anything. So to them, wasn't doing it correctly.
Were they prominent members of the church? I know that you said it kind of
Oh,
people
yeah.
were meeting at the house, but then once it went beyond the house to like
They
a bigger...
have always, I mean, we went to church about 3 times a week. My mom has always worked at the church, volunteered at the church rather. My dad volunteered at the church wherever he could, but he, you know, worked. And he's now fully employed by their church. Growing up, we were involved, or we were church as much as we could be at church, and there wasn't too much that I had, like a say in terms of how often I went to church.
Yeah, it was their entire world, so therefore it was your entire world.
Correct. I really enjoyed youth group, but I didn't like sitting in service. I liked going and hanging out with my friends.
Yeah. I was going to ask what you liked about it, hanging out with friends.
I really liked, I mean, I didn't have a social life. I was homeschooled, so I was hanging out with my siblings all day and my mom, which is not very fun 7 days a week. So youth group was exciting for me because I could socialize with other people. And as I got older, so like around early high school, late junior high, early high school, I would sometimes get to go to a different campus and see my friends at this different campus, which is like 30 minutes away. So that was also very exciting. So I can drive.
You said, oh, because you could drive?
I couldn't drive at that point. So anytime somebody offered to give me a ride to go to this other, I was so excited.
That's really funny. Yeah, but that's like you were like trying to like, you know, like, I don't know, like do your own thing, which is like really what, you know, kids need to do when they're getting into adolescence and getting older. Like they need to be able to have their own circle of friends, their own interests, their own, not be kept in this like Christian bubble of just only Christianity and that's all, you're only going to meet Christian friends and you can only hang out at church. And so you were taking what you could get.
Exactly. And I attached myself to like, you know, the scene kids, the emo kids. And so I had crazy hair and makeup and crazy clothes from Hot Topic.
And conservative Christian parents don't like that, I don't think. Usually.
You know what? My parents were surprisingly okay with it. They would not let me wear black nail polish. I don't know what that was about. They really hated that. But I could wear anything that, you know, was appropriate from Hot Topic or, you know, studded belts and like all that. I could listen to metal as long as it was a Christian band, which grew up in the golden age of Christian metalcore. It was it was very good.
What were some of the bands that you listened to? They may not be ones I'm familiar with, but I'm curious what bands.
Well, Under Oath was my favorite band.
Okay.
Listened to August Burns Red, Oh Sleeper, Impending Doom, all Christian bands, all smack. They're all so good. Still to this day, I love them. But so that was another way that I was just different from my family, who were, I would describe them as very normal.
Just like they dress normal, they like normal things.
If they walked into a Walmart, you would never remember them. Like, they just blend right in.
Blend right in. And that's not for everybody, you know? A lot of us don't want to blend right in.
That's fine, but I stuck out like a sore thumb in pretty much every way that you could possibly imagine.
Tell me a little bit about your siblings. How were they different from you growing up?
Well, got my oldest sister. She is the perfect one. She does everything perfectly. My parents will do anything she says or asks for. She went to college. She got a degree. now she's married and has kids, just like white picket fence. She did everything by the books as scripted,
That's
and
hard.
she's the favorite. Like
Hmm.
even she recognizes she's the favorite. Like this is acknowledged.
Wow.
And then there's my older brother who's about 4 years older than me. My older sister's 7 years older than me. So
Hmm.
my brother, he and I bonded a lot because we're the middle children, and he was also the only boy. So he got a lot of flack from my father for not being the right type of boy a lot. Um, he, by and large, also followed the script, like did everything right. He
Went
went to
along with
church all the
it.
time. He went to college. He got a degree. He's married now, like
Hmm.
has his own house, like, and still it's not enough. And so we,
Dad doesn't approve of his personality or his
yeah,
interests.
he's too soft. He's too emotional. I I think that's why we bonded so much because we're both very emotional people and both were heavily judged by our father for
Mm.
that. And um, it,
Hmm.
I'm trying to think of how to read this.
Yeah,
We
mhm.
we were very we were pretty close growing up. None of us were like fighting or hated each other. Like we were pretty close, but I wouldn't say we hung out all the time, if that
Hmm.
makes sense.
Yeah.
But as we've grown into adults and you're realizing these things that we all went through as kids and um, the rose-colored glasses are coming off my brother right now and has been for about the last year as he
Interesting.
processes his own stuff. And we've actually, within the last 365 days, since quarantine started, really,
Hmm.
gotten very, very close.
That's
We call
cool.
each other like almost every day now. We text every day. And so that's my relationship with my brother. And then my little sister's 4 years younger than me. So we're all 4-ish years apart. Um, she was the princess. She was not the perfect one by any means, like my older sister, but she was the princess and she still could do no wrong because she was the baby.
Yeah.
Um, it's kind of interesting because my older sister's the favorite, little sister's second favorite, and then my brother and I are tied for last. But um, she was all of these things that we got criticized for being. She cried a lot. She was very emotional and very commanding, and she was the baby. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So
There's
that
this
was kind of
dynamic, I
our,
think, sometimes with
yeah.
parents.
So that was kind of our dynamic growing up. And then there was just me that stayed in my room as much as I possibly could and listened to my iPod as much as I possibly could and just
Hmm.
tried to stay out of it.
Stay out of it. Just you didn't want to any like you don't want to
I
get
don't want
mixed
any
up in the
trouble.
family drama or the expectations maybe of
Yeah,
family.
absolutely. Yes,
That's a big
definitely.
one with family and with church. There's all these expectations on people to be a certain way, conform to whatever the norms are for that family, for that church. That can be really
Hmm.
hard if you don't really want to be that way or do those things.
Yeah,
Yeah. So
absolutely.
you and your brother were different, very different in some ways, but you had a connection on like the emotional level and you kind of saw
Hmm.
things in a similar way. So
Yeah.
how did you stay kind of connected even though you weren't super close years ago? Like how did you stay connected even though you were so different?
Our disdain for our father, I think,
Oh,
honestly, which
common
I'm
enemy.
obviously, yeah, I think there's a lot more than that, but
Yeah.
that was a big one because for me, my brother was a sure, safe place that I could go to vent or to rant about something that dad did or said because I
Hmm.
knew he would get it and I knew that he possibly heard it before, probably heard it before. And we were able to kind of be that for each other. And that really ramped up over the last year because my parents have really skyrocketed into some wacky stuff lately.
Oh no. Um, anything that you can mention, like what kind of, or just talk, or mention like vaguely, even if you can't get into the
Well, with
details, like
like
what kind of stuff?
politics and
Hmm.
stuff, they're very conservative. They always have been, but it's, I mean, I don't want to go as far to say they're like QAnon, but they're, my dad especially is just getting really like rhetorically violent. Like he's just starting to
Yeah.
use really violent language, and it's very uncomfortable, and is just ramping up on misogyny and like homophobia, and just like all of these things that I knew that he always held because of his beliefs are just now being amplified. And stuff with
It's
race has gotten pretty bad.
it's like
And
gasoline was poured on a fire.
yes, exactly. And it's become very difficult for my brother and my little sister to bear because they don't feel that way at all. And they're kind of, because it's been so magnified over the last year, they're able to see now why I left. And that was honestly the big reason that I'm now so close with them, is because they both separately reached out to me last year and were basically like, we're sorry. Like, we're very sorry.
Oh,
Like we,
four.
a lot of it was for not sticking up for me, uh, allowing my parents to talk to me the way that they did,
Yeah.
participating in jokes about me that they thought were just lighthearted and
They thought
not
it was
rooted in
funny.
anything real, just things like that. And of course, I never held any of that against them. But once they came to me, I was like, oh my gosh, like, don't even worry about it. Like, let's just
That's
do better, you
that's
know?
nice. Yeah. You're a forgiving person.
Yeah, yeah. Honestly, like when I think of troubles that I had with my family, I don't think of my siblings. I think of my parents. Like we're only
Yeah.
products of them. I don't really I didn't hold them accountable for any of that. Um but yeah, so the last year or so, they've kind of are coming to terms with a lot of stuff that I've been saying for a very long time. I mean, I deconverted 6 years ago. So I've been very separate from this for a while.
Yeah.
And they're starting to see a lot of the reasons why I pulled myself away from that.
They're starting to see what you saw
Yeah.
and what you still
And
see.
they're
Yeah.
they're starting to receive the treatment that I once received, which was a big part of it, because they're
Kind of
still
like being
religious. They
scolded kind of for not fitting
Yeah,
in or not doing the right thing.
exactly. They're still religious. Like they still go, well, they don't go to church because it's COVID, but they're still involved in their religion and their faith, heavily so, and but it's not the right kind to my parents anymore. Like they're being too liberal, they're loving too many people and it's wrong. And they're like,
Yeah.
"Hold on, wait a minute."
There's so much there. Like,
Yeah, exactly.
wow. So I thought your brother moved out. Is he out of the house?
He is, but he is living one street away
There
at
you
the
go.
house that we actually grew up in. He bought our
Oh,
childhood home.
that's
Yeah,
kind of cool.
yeah,
But your younger sister still lives in the house, and is she the one
yes.
that your parents kind of take care of a little more closely, or?
I wouldn't say they necessarily take care of her. She works and all that. She just has some
Oh,
health
okay.
problems that means that sometimes she has to get sent home from work, so her income is not super
Gotcha. It's not
fixed right
consistent.
now.
Yeah.
Yeah, so they're letting her live there, like, so she doesn't have to pay for rent
Yeah.
in the event that something were to go wrong.
Yeah.
Um, but she takes care, buys her own groceries and all that stuff. But she's just very, very close to the situation.
So before you started to deconvert and have doubts, prior to that point, uh, what else is important about your story that we maybe haven't touched on that you want people to know?
Um, well, there's a pretty big event in my life. So when I graduated high school, I wanted to get out of where I grew up immediately. I wanted to get out. I wanted to move to a different state. And at the time, I was dating, was in a long distance relationship with this guy. And I figured, why not just move there and go to school there? I mean, I already know people that live there. I'd have some sort of community. So I did that. I went to school or art school there. But after I got there, things progressively got worse with him. Um, we were going to church and stuff. Like he was religious as well, same type of, faith,
Mm-hmm.
Christianity. But things progressively got more abusive as that relationship went on.
About how old were you?
I moved out when I was 19.
Okay, so you were about 19 when you moved out and moved in with him and went to art school.
I didn't move in with him, but he pretty much never left my apartment. So if we basically lived together, but yeah, he progressively got more abusive. It started like very emotionally abusive and manipulative, and then escalated. I don't know if you'll need to put a disclaimer at the beginning for this. It progressively went to sexual abuse and all this stuff. I was, saving myself for marriage, and I was very I was very upfront with that information early on. This was no secret. It was a very integral part of who I
Who you
was.
were?
And
Mm-hmm.
yeah. And so having that happen is very shell shocking. And the of, emotional abuse that followed that to convince me that it was okay. It was very
Manipulation.
cyclical, very manipulative. By the end of it, I had no friends. I just had him. I barely spoke to my family, just completely isolated me from everybody. And even made me go to couples counseling with a church counselor. So not even a licensed therapist. I had to go to a church counselor where I don't know how like you can rectify this or justify this to, a Christian counselor, but essentially blaming me for, not wanting to perform sexual duties, even though we weren't married. And that was what I was supposed to do. And I was supposed to want to do that. So he wouldn't have to take it from me, like
Wow.
wild shit like that. Oh, am I allowed to curse?
Oh, yeah, sure.
Okay.
Yeah, you're fine. Yeah, no
Wild shit
problem.
like that.
Mm-hmm.
That went on for 4 years. And right before we broke up, so actually Christmas time, and he came with me to my family's Christmas and stayed uh, in an apartment that my parents have, uh, like out back of their house. So he stayed kind of in a separate building because we weren't allowed to stay under the same roof. So we went to a friend's house and played games and started drinking, and he got way too drunk. And so I took him and dragged him home. I was like, you can't be like this out here. Took him home, got in an argument, and he, for the first time, tried to hit me physically. Before it was sexual and emotional abuse, but this was like he tried to punch me in the face. Thankfully, he was too drunk and missed terribly.
Wow.
But I left. Unfortunately, stayed with him for a couple months, but that just stuck in my mind, and he pretended to have no memory of it. But I don't believe him. But eventually, he went. He was traveling and was in Japan at the time, and I was like, we got in an argument, and I was like, it's safe for me to leave. He's on the other side of the world.
Wow.
He can't do anything. So I broke up with him while he was overseas. And after all of that, I had to like really think about, first of all, everything that just happened over the
Well,
last
good
3
for
years.
you, by the way, for having the strength to be able to do that. I know that maybe you feel like, okay, he was far away, so I can do it now, but like
Mhm.
that takes a lot of courage to do that, and that's a really terrible situation to have gone through. And I'm sure it was scary, because if he's someone who is abusive emotionally and also physically,
And he's going to come back.
right?
Yeah, he's not moving there, unfortunately. And that was a very real fear. There were some
Yeah.
instances where my, tires magically didn't have air in them when I went to work the next morning. And so things like that freaked me out for sure. I ended up getting a new car and moving so that hopefully like he
He
wouldn't be able
wouldn't.
to just see my car parked outside somewhere and know where I live now.
Mm-hmm.
So thankfully nothing happened after that, but beyond, obviously now I just had to figure out how to come back from this mentally. And
Yeah,
a lot of the friends that pushed away, welcomed me back with open arms, which I'm very grateful for.
that's cool.
Um, but that's probably really when I started really questioning. my religion, because
And kind of spell that out for me or for everybody listening. Like, what were the things going through your mind that obviously you went through something very traumatic. So like, what was the next step logically for you, like, or the next thing that you started thinking about that made you kind of go down this path a little bit more?
well, the first thing I thought about was purity culture, right?
Yeah.
I went on Princess of Purity retreats. Like I did the whole thing, was lectured by somebody who'd never kissed anyone in their whole life and just weird stuff like that. So purity culture was the first thing that came to my mind because by, technicalities, I'm not pure anymore. That was taken from me. And I was like, this has never been accounted for. In any sermon I've ever heard, this situation has never been accounted for. Nobody talks about what happens when it's taken from you, when your autonomy is not involved. And it wasn't like, I surprisingly and thankfully was not overcome with shame. I know a lot of people really struggle with that after events like that, and it's very common.
Yeah.
Thankfully, that wasn't the case for me. It was more so like, wait a minute, this happens to a lot of people. What do we do then? And I was like, oh, I got to figure this out.
Wow.
There's other things, but that was a really big one. And so I joined a Bible study with one of my friends, and I didn't go back to church like Sunday services, but I went to this Bible study every week and I really enjoyed it. I've always been a very inquisitive person and I've read the Bible a million times, but I was excited to, read it and delve into it with peers,
Mm-hmm.
and not only just peers, but women peers. And since this was the subject that was plaguing me, who better to study it with than other women who might have experienced the same thing?
Yeah, exactly.
And one thing led to another, and eventually I wasn't on that subject anymore. I was on all kinds of different subjects, gay marriage,
Looking
and
into all sorts of stuff.
yeah, all sorts of stuff. And the way that we were doing this Bible study was we weren't just like reading the Bible and talking about it. We were pulling up old texts, we were pulling up old translations and how that might be today, and like how they could have mistranslated stuff. Is really interesting. And like,
That's like the most kick-ass Bible study that you can think of. And Bible studies aren't, I'm not like all for them or
I
anything.
know
But
it
I
was
loved that kind of thing when I was a Christian, like digging into it, like, but yeah,
right.
what was the original, So that's really for Bible study, pretty cool.
Yeah, it was really fun. I really enjoyed it, and I was really beginning to understand that for me personally, the Bible was no longer inerrant. It was sort of a a stepping stone. Like these are some good things you should consider. And that was
Yeah.
more how my faith was at that time. Still very religious, but still like, hey, these old dudes from thousands of years ago probably got some stuff wrong, but they still like had some really cool shit to say, so we should hear them out. That was sort of my
Yeah.
attitude.
Yeah.
And so I was becoming much more liberal in terms of my faith and
Mm-hmm.
who's allowed to practice and who's right and who's wrong. I no longer really believed in denominations because I thought, again, I'm going back to it being personal. Like this
Yeah.
denomination is good for you. And it's not right or wrong. It's just good for you. So that's kind
Yeah.
of where my head landed. But something happened in the Bible study that irked me a lot, and I ended up leaving. Um, it came out that one of the members who had just been, I don't know if promoted is the right word, but asked to co-lead the Bible study, like basically take the weight off of the person that had
Yes.
been leading it the whole time and split the work up.
Mm-hmm.
It recently had come out that she and another girl who were in the Bible study had previously, years ago, been in a lesbian relationship.
Two
And
girls in that Bible
in
study.
this, yes.
Interesting.
Um, and I was like, oh, okay. And that's kind of, how I reacted to it. And the person who was leading the Bible study, who I was close to, I would have considered her a best friend. She was like, we can't have a leader that might be gay. And I'm like, well, first of all, they're saying they're not gay anymore, which I don't believe. But they're they're saying they're not in a relationship anymore. One of them is dating a man. Like, what does this have to do with right now? And what is it like? It really
Right.
bothered me. She was just like, the whole whisper, like,
Right.
like, I was like, I don't like this. I don't, the vibes are off. I'm out of here.
Starting to get
And
really
I left.
judgmental and clicky
Yeah,
and like not
this is
kind.
not what exactly. I didn't like it. So I left. And over time, my friends are less and less Christian, and I'm making more friends that are atheist, agnostic, whatever.
Yeah.
And I'm exposed to all these people that are loving better than anybody else I've ever met. They're loving people more, they're loving people harder, they're doing things for people instead of just praying for them.
Mm.
And I was really attracted to that, like, really loved activism and, really putting my money where my mouth is. And I was really excited to be surrounded by all these people that were loving correctly in my head.
Yeah.
Um, and the common factor was none of them had these weird rules from religion tell you how you have to love some people. You know what I mean? And it was very slow. And I don't know that I really realized what was happening for a long time. I'm completely divorced from my family at this point. Like, this would have gone completely differently had I been
Still living at
having
home.
to still living at home, still having to pretend that I go to church and still, and not, or having all these questions that I couldn't explore as well. Um, I was free to do that, thankfully, because I was so far from them. Um, so yeah, it was very strange, the early stages for sure.
One of the biggest lies of being in Christianity is that they have the moral high ground, or that Christianity is the moral
Yes.
standard. I feel like that is like, I was telling my wife this last night. Like I was just thinking, like, I told her that even like 4 years ago, before the Trump presidency, like I felt still like I could be like really moral and perfect and great and good and a good person, but if a Christian were to say, yeah, but where do you get your morals? Like, yeah, but where does there's still part of me deep inside, even if I had a good answer, that would still feel a little bit like inferior. Like, well, it's really hard to say, like, it's really hard to come back to, what do you say to that? But now, after the Trump presidency and seeing how married to Trump conservative evangelicalism was, and of course, I don't have to list all the terrible things that Trump resembles or embodies or whatever, from racism to misogyny to just everything, just immoral
Hmm.
things. Christians are like totally fine with it now, as
Hmm.
long as they get low taxes and a Republican in the White House. And it's crazy to me, like, that their faith, their religion, their ethics, their morals, like, don't matter as much as politics. In some ways, I feel like Christianity's just become politics. I
Oh
don't
yeah.
know. So I feel so much better. Like you're talking about, they love harder. These people were like actually really good people. It got you involved in like, or even either involved or like around activism and like actually
Hmm.
doing things and helping people like in real life. And
Hmm.
it's just this like epiphany in my mind to like think, you know, you were becoming like a better person by leaving it, and you
Hmm.
have the moral high ground. You know what I mean? Like, not Christianity.
That argument is so irritating to me because you are doing what performing these moral acts because you're afraid of big sky man. I'm doing these acts, these moral acts, because I believe them to be right, and nobody's making me do them, and nobody's telling me to do them. Just believe that they're right, and I don't know how you can think that any other motivation is more morally correct than that,
Yeah, out of the goodness of your
personally.
heart.
Yeah, like I'm not getting anything out of this. There's no, you know, golden gilded mansion for me waiting in heaven because
Right.
I bought a hotel for a homeless person for a night. I'm
Hmm.
just gonna do it and then go home. And that's
I feel like that's so much more like, it's more real, it's more pure.
yeah.
It just, it's more ethical. It's like
I
what morals
agree.
should be, you know?
I agree.
Yeah. Was there a kind of a point, like you've really, I mean, what you've described for the last few minutes is like you've really come a long way through this period of your life. Like you
Yes.
went to this Bible study and started exploring different ideas, and like you really like transitioned a lot like through and kind of out of this conservative Christian mindset. Was there a point when you were like, a point, maybe not a moment, but like it could be, that you realize like, I don't think I believe in this religion anymore. I don't think I believe in God anymore.
First, I would say I started sort of divorcing from doctrine, right? I still very much believed in God. I just didn't believe in the same rules that I used to about who
Yeah.
God was and what he wanted for me. That wasn't super jarring because at the end of the day, I still believe in God and Jesus. Like, same thing. I just feel like I maybe understand him a bit better now.
Hmm.
But where I started kind of divorcing God was, don't tell any Christians this, but college.
Oh,
That's where I started divorcing from God and learning about science.
that's so funny.
Their fears were correct. I went to school. Incredible.
That's hilarious.
So I had an elective. I had to take an elective for my degree, which I think is kind of silly, but I chose astronomy because growing up I was obsessed with the stars. I was obsessed with, anything I could learn about the
That's
planets and all
cool.
that. I loved it. I would often actually, when I found out that any star we're looking at in the sky could already be dead and we wouldn't know for like thousands and thousands of years, it would make me cry as a kid. So you could say I was a bit
Oh.
obsessed with the fact that I could be looking at dead stars.
Yeah.
So I was like, I'm going to take this astronomy class. And um, I was like, holy shit. Like all of these things, I'm not going to obviously go through the entire class, but that was kind of my holy shit moment.
Hmm.
There's no God. Like
Wow. It's like
this,
you peeled back the curtain, looked into space, and looked into the sky, and like he wasn't there. There were
and yeah,
stars, but he wasn't there.
there was a really big moment for me in that class where they were describing how small we are on a civilization level, not like a physical level, but how is as much progress as we've made in the last few hundred years, we're still very low on the civilization scale. Like
Yeah.
we're not very civilized compared to, obviously there are theories, it's kind of philosophy, I guess, but basically they were saying we could be the equivalent of bacteria in a petri dish and something, much more structured and more civilized, not a god, but civilization that's much larger and structured than
More
we are
developed.
could be holding the petri dish. We would never know. Like it wasn't supposed to be like this is true, this was happening, but it's just like a
Yeah.
thought.
Mm-hmm.
Like this could
This could
explain all
be.
of these weird things that happen. We may never know. And the reality of there just probably isn't a God, like really hit me hard in that class.
Wow.
And I kind of like kept it to myself for a while. And like I said, I wasn't really evangelical, so it wasn't like anybody really saw a difference in how I was behaving.
Mm-hmm.
And I just,
Was this a
kind of,
state college, or was this a like a Christian college, or a,
no, it was not a Christian college.
yeah,
It was just a
just a regular college?
regular old college.
Good. Okay. Yeah.
um, so I was kind of, watching YouTube and watching documentaries on most just about the world and like biology documentaries that you would see on like TV, like life and looking at animals and like how
Yeah.
they've changed and like all this stuff. Really, actually learning evolution instead of like evolution is this thing. It's it's kind of, but it's wrong. So don't spend too much time on it. So that's how I was raised. So learning about evolution, I was like, dang, this shit is wild. And it's kind of funny because I was dating somebody at the time that was not religious. And I didn't see a problem with that because, again, it's my faith, it's not theirs.
Yeah.
And so I was dating this person. They didn't care that I was religious. It wasn't really something we talked about super often. And one day I was hanging out with my ex and some of our friends and a couple people just met, and they were talking about church, and everybody was just like, "Oh yeah, I was raised in the church, blah blah blah," and I was like, "Yeah, me too. It's crazy." And one of the people that we had just met said, "Oh, are you still religious?" And I just said, "No." And that was my ex, my partner at the time just looked at me like, "What?" I was like, and even I was just kind of like, "Hold on a second." No,
Wow.
I guess I'm not. And they were, I mean, my ex just like looked at me like, oh, holy
Whoa.
shit. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Like,
And
whoa, something
it
just
was
happened
not,
here.
yeah, it was nothing that I had ever even thought
Yeah.
until it just flew out of my mouth. And then just
Wow.
like, I guess I'm not.
I find those moments amazing. Like like part of you knew that, and
Yeah,
like
it
another
was in
part of you was
there.
blocking it off, like going
Uh-huh.
about life as normal, not like purposely blocking it off. I think I did something similar, like blocking it out, just kind of going along,
Hmm.
going through the motions of life, and then someone in a moment asks you or says something, and you're like, nope, not religious. Whoa, what? Wait, what did I say? Oh my gosh.
Exactly.
Yeah, that I've told this story many times, but when my wife, we were talking about Jesus, and I was talking about the humanity of Jesus, and I was in Bible school, and I thought I was still Christian, and I was kind of blocking out where this was leading, and she just said, "You're not a Christian anymore." Like, she was
Hmm.
fearful because she still was, and she was like, "I see what's happening. This is what's happening," and I was like, "Oh, like I wouldn't have sworn at the time, but oh shit, like
Yeah.
she's right." Yeah. So I think those are amazing moments.
I had a similar moment when I realized I was bisexual was also an accident.
Oh,
My partner at the time was watching all these music videos with all these beautiful women that I'd done for like the millionth time. They were like, "You're gay," and I was like, "No," similar thing. And
because
they're like,
you were watching
"Yeah,
like these videos kind of like more than maybe people would normally, unless they were like,
yeah," and
kind
they
of
were
enjoying
like,
this.
"Just answer as quickly as you can.
That's hilarious.
Would you make out with any of those women?" And I was like, "Yes, definitely." It's like even I've had a lot of those moments in my life. I just don't even realize, you know.
Yeah, it's like an instinct.
That was a very interesting period of my life.
When did that happen? That experience, the bisexual, like
The
realizing you're bisexual, like did that happen many years later, or was it kind of during that same time?
It's kind of during the same time, yeah. It was maybe like 6 months after. Yeah. Definitely within the same year.
Wow, so these are some big realizations back to back. So, like in a year's time, you changed a ton. Well, you didn't change a ton maybe in that year, but like you realized you had changed a ton.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. It was very formative. Probably I think that was yeah, that was my last year in school. So I was about to graduate when all of that was happening.
Wow. What did you end up getting your degree in?
Art.
Cool.
I didn't have a concentration because my school didn't do concentration, so it's just art.
Well, hey, I think that's neat.
Yeah.
Do you still probably a stupid question, but do you still like what kind of art do you like to do, and do you still do some of that?
It's not a stupid question.
I mean, it's
I
like you majored
don't
in art, and I'm
make
like, do
art.
you like
I
art? Do
don't
you do it?
I don't do any art anymore.
Oh.
A lot of that has to do with the trauma because I was in that relationship for a long time and at the same time going to art school, and my escape from him was going to my studio. So a lot of times when I was trying to get away from him, I was
That's where
making
you'd
art.
go.
And so unfortunately, it kind of got tainted where even out of the relationship, when I would go back to make art, just
It
immediately
brings back those.
transported back to that. And I was upset about that for a while. Now I just don't really care. I'm still just doing what makes me happy. It's just not art anymore.
Yeah, that's cool. So when you think back on the Christian version of yourself, now that you're not Christian, what do you think about that person? The maybe the most Christian version of yourself that you could think of. What do you think about them now?
I honestly think back very fondly on her. I got a lot of stuff, or I had a lot of stuff wrong about the world, but honestly, my heart hasn't changed at all. Even when I was a Christian, I was always looking for loopholes in the Bible to love more people and be around more people and have relationship with more people. And that hasn't changed at all. I just now have more freedom to do that. And I'm a little bit limitless at this point now. So I would just, I mean, I think very fondly on her. She was just a baby.
It's interesting to think back on our previous selves. They, especially as time goes by, it feels like a totally different person sometimes, but then you always see these connections to like who you used to be and, well, who you used to be and who you are now. And there's definitely always like some connection. And that you kind of answered my next question that I was going to ask, which is fine. So when you look back on that person, you sort of answered this, but maybe elaborate if you can think of anything else. What's something that stayed the same about yourself? You know, you changed a ton. I mean, like a lot, you know. So what's something positive about yourself that stayed the same through that entire experience?
Well, one thing that has always been true about me is I'm always going to be inquisitive. Whatever it is I believe, I'm going to know exactly why I believe it. And I'm always going to be open to new information and hungry for new information. So beyond just like obviously loving people and that being my dream is, to love and be loved in return. I'm always I'm always going to want to learn more. I'm always going to be inquisitive and trying to figure things out. There's no end to knowledge, and that really excites me, and I think it always has.
That's awesome. I love that.
Which is also why I think even if my circumstances were different, I still would have ended up not being religious at the end of the day.
That's a fascinating thought. Like,
Yeah,
would you have ended up this way eventually anyway, despite
I
the
think
path
I
you
would
take?
have
I actually think that's
eventually.
true of me too. And I think there's a similar thing that I feel like, as far as like being inquisitive, loving to learn, that's always been true of me. And I think I would have found my way to this spot eventually through some path.
Hmm.
Maybe it would have been 40 years later. Maybe it would have been 10 years sooner. Who knows? But
Yeah.
yeah, that's really interesting. So is there something you've learned or experienced that you wouldn't have since you deconverted? So if you were still a Christian, you would never have learned or experienced something that you have now.
I've been able to figure out outside of religion um, that I can be there for more people. I can be a positive um, light to more people if I'm taking care of myself and not just saying yes to everything because I'm not going to be the best I can be if I'm not taking care of myself first. And allowing myself to do that without feeling guilt or shame. That was really big for me.
In terms of relationships?
Well, in terms of my mental health, I mean, I didn't really go into this, but I've had mental health problems since I was a kid. I probably should have mentioned this at
Oh,
some
that's
point,
okay.
but
Yeah.
I've been bipolar since I was about 13, but I didn't get diagnosed until 3 years ago. Um, I developed psychosis, I would guess probably around 15 years old.
Hmm.
Got diagnosed with that about 3 years ago as well. And I have CPTSD.
Mm-hmm.
So self-care was never something that I was really encouraged to do.
Yeah.
And my mental health majorly suffered because of that. Now I'm in an amazing place mentally. Like, sure, I still have these things, but they're completely manageable. And which leads me to my next thing I was going to say that I wouldn't have been able to experience is hope.
Wow.
Up until I left my faith behind, I had truly never felt hope for anything. I did not expect to still be alive today. And I am. And I think it's pretty ironic that I had to leave religion to find hope, which I'm pretty sure is a virtue. That
Yeah.
isn't
Yeah.
that like
Yeah. Faith, hope, and
in the
love.
Bible?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that was really big for me.
You didn't imagine you'd be alive today. Why did you say that?
I was very suicidal.
Yeah.
I always have been. It's it's less of I'm so sad that I don't want to be here anymore, and more that I've had intrusive suicidal thoughts since I was very young. So it's just,
It's just always been there.
yeah, growing up in the church, you're told that's the devil, and you're just not praying enough because the devil's able to sneak in your head and tell you these things. No, it's a mental condition. It is a health crisis, not a spiritual crisis. But I
Yeah.
understand that now. So no, I didn't. I fully expected that that would get to me by now, in a very terrible way,
Yeah.
to be honest.
Yeah. Well, and I'll try not to get like emotional myself when I say this, but I'm I've had thoughts like that in the past. I haven't lived your life. I'm not saying that like I know exactly how you feel or anything like that, but like I'm glad that you're here and I'm glad that that you were able to make it through that.
Thank you.
That's
Me too.
hard. Right. Yeah.
Yes, it was terrible. It's very difficult.
Yeah. And I get like I think something I've learned from doing this podcast is like my pain can help somebody else.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that again, that is very, that's part of the reason I'm so open with stuff like that, is
Yeah, me too.
because somebody might hear that passing by, or read it on a post and be like, and see an ally in me, and know that if they ever needed to, I would be something that somebody they could speak to, even if we've never spoken before. And I've
Exactly.
always felt that way. So I'm very open about mental health and very open about my experiences in general, especially, you probably speak too flippantly about the abuse I experienced. A lot of people get uncomfortable, but I would have loved to know somebody that was going through that at that time,
Yep.
or when I was going through that at that time.
Exactly. That's exactly the point. There's someone
Yeah.
who may really need to hear that who wouldn't if you didn't speak up and
Hmm.
then you speak up and they happen to hear it and it's the thing that gives them the comfort they need to get through the moment. For some
Hmm.
people it might be a song that helps them through or they hear someone's mention their experience and that helps them get through whatever it is. It's good when we can live a little bit more like when not everyone can be open about how they're feeling in the moment, whether it's
Hmm.
about not feeling Christian anymore or it's about not wanting to live anymore. Like not everyone can talk about that, but so it's great when people can talk about it, like you, like to be
Yeah.
able to share kind of your experience because then that helps that person who has no voice and can't let their voice be heard feel like their
Hmm.
voice is being heard and feel like someone understands me, someone gets me, someone knows what I've gone through, and if they can get through it, I can get through it. You know,
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah,
And
it's cool.
church is not a safe place for people with those thoughts at all.
Yep.
Um, I mean, the amount of shame that comes with having the mental health issues and being involved in a church is unbearable, because you're taught negative emotions and stuff are the devil, and
Hmm.
if you're overcome with them, it means you don't have enough Jesus and you haven't been praying hard enough, or you just have to have more faith and he'll take it all away.
Yeah.
And when that doesn't happen, you're left feeling very shameful. That's rough.
Hmm. What you said earlier was there's no it in knowledge when it comes to knowledge. And I feel like
Hmm.
that's true when it comes to mental health and being in the church. The church teaches you there is an it. It's God. That's the answer. And so if
Hmm.
someone is having mental health struggles or any struggle and God doesn't answer that struggle or help them with that struggle,
Hmm.
they're left with literally no answer. It's
Right.
God or nothing. And I think the wonderful thing is like you have found there are other answers and
Oh,
better
there
answers.
are much better answers. Hope outside of that.
So there are obviously people who listen to the podcast who are going through mental health issues or they're going through deconversion or they're having, some difficult thing that they're going through in life. What's some piece of encouragement or piece of guidance that you'd give them? Someone who maybe was going through what you were going through, now that you're on the other side of it.
Sticking up for yourself is a very, very difficult routine to start. Um, it the first, like, I don't know how to describe this. Learning how to take agency in in your own emotions and validating your own emotions and saying no and putting up personal boundaries for your own health, like mental health, is extremely important, but it's starting that is very difficult. Making the first step, and especially when it comes to families. If you have a family that is less than accepting of either your mental health or your deconversion, I think both would apply. Just know that when you do finally take that step and standing up for yourself, the first time you do it is going to be the hardest, and everything after that gets exponentially easier. It really does. Like, it's gonna suck. And I'm not gonna pretend it's gonna be easy or fun, but sticking up for yourself only gets easier the more that you do it. And the first time you do it is gonna be the hardest, and after that, it's smooth sailing. So all you have to do is build up the courage to do it once.
It's taking that first step.
Yes, and
Yeah.
I highly encourage everybody to do that for themselves, because you're not going to be able to be the best you if you're bending over backwards for people that don't really care about how you're feeling
Yeah.
constantly.
You need to look out for your own health, your own mental health, your own physical health, your own well-being.
I actually had to explain this to my brother recently as he was trying to set boundaries with my parents, and I told him the same thing. The first no is the hardest one, and it's gonna get easier every single no after that.
Yeah.
All that to say, don't take self-care lightly. I know it's a very like trendy term, like, ooh, self-care, bathtub time. Don't take it lightly though. It can
Yeah.
be lighthearted, but it's crucial. It's very
It's
crucial,
key. It's huge.
and setting personal boundaries only gets easier the more that you do it. So I hope that could be encouraging for people that are trying.
Yeah, I think it is. I think it will be. That's awesome. What resources did you find helpful as I mean, you talked about, you learned a lot through your process, but what resources did you find helpful along the way, or even now?
I didn't have a ton of resources beyond just like being inquisitive and opening books and reading articles and stuff like that. I really love. I didn't find anything like this podcast or um, ex-religious content really up until the last couple of years, far after I had deconverted. But I mean, I have to say that things like this podcast, and others like it, are great tools, because even now, even 6 years later, I'm listening to these stories and realizing, holy shit, like I am actually not alone. And there's so much power that you can gain for yourself, realizing that your situation is not unique. And this isn't a terrible thing that's just happening to you. So, so this podcast obviously is incredible. There's a lot of content on YouTube. I actually watch a lot of people from that deconverted from other religions as well, because it's all kind of the same story, you know?
Yeah.
It's the same process, it's the same mental toll. And I think that there are easy ways for people to listen to or use in private. So you don't have to, buy books and have them on your shelf for the world to see. There, you can privately listen to them. And
Yeah, listen to a podcast and no one ever
yep,
knows you listen to it.
exactly. It's a safe way to take in the content without fear of repercussions while you're working through all of this, because it's a
Yeah.
very fragile time.
Yep, exactly. It's a fragile time. That's a good way to put it. You mentioned that you're feeling much better. So explain kind of how different you feel, like just in this moment or nowadays, like in general nowadays. How different do you feel, or in what ways do you feel different than you used to?
Well, after leaving religion, I felt that I could now seek therapy. So I have been in therapy for a few years. It was a rocky start. Took me quite a long time to get to the point of being okay. But I live alone, which is a huge plus, and I'm just doing things that make me happy. I'm off medication now. I'm not even on medication anymore, which I didn't think would be possible.
Wow.
That's not to say that should be everybody's goal, but I'm not even having to be medicated anymore. I just, being so far from the source of a lot of my agitants, being my parents, is really helping me a lot. I've been away for a long time now, but it takes time to get rid of all of those things through therapy and all of that. So I also encourage anybody that's stuck nearby the people that are causing them pain to get away as far as you can. It's
Distance, whether it be emotional or physical, just some distance between you and those.
It's incredibly effective.
That's cool. It's like God, it gives you time to breathe, you know?
Yeah, and I can still talk to my parents, but I do it on my own time. They can't just pop by and, So yeah, being far away from the trauma and being in therapy and having a job. I do have a job that I really love. I'm doing hobbies that I really love. I fix computers. So
cool.
I like computer hardware. I don't do any software. So I just get a pile of computers on my desk every day and work through them and then go home. And it's very
cool.
relaxing. And it's been doing this type of work for about 5 or 6 years now. But I just started at this job a few months ago and love it. It's perfect.
What are some?
That's actually how I learned of your podcast, because I sit at a desk. I sit at a desk all day with headphones in. And you can only listen to so much music 40 hours a week. And so I was like, I need to hear people tell stories because I love hearing stories.
Yeah.
And there was a YouTuber or something that mentioned a different podcast. I think it's the Shunned Podcast. And then, which somehow led me to this one. I don't remember how I found it, but it's a long trail of all these
connecting trails,
ex-religious content. And I binged this podcast for
that's cool.
A long time, just sitting at work, making, fixing my computers and listening to people's stories. So I'm jealous of your position because I love hearing stories, and that is really what drew me to binge the podcast is how many unique stories there are and different ways that I relate to each person that comes on this podcast. It's so crazy.
Well, April, thank you so much for sharing your story. And there are some very, inspirational things, I think, about kind of how you came through everything. And I always say this, but it's very true. I think that someone listening will really get a lot out of what you shared today. So thank you for taking the time to do it.
Thank you for having me. This was a very delightful experience.
Thanks for listening to Voices of Deconversion. Join us next time by following or subscribing on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere you listen to podcasts.